Morning, Abby. Morning, Luke. Morning, Paulina. Cleveland State students, if you don't mind turning your cameras on, I always think that's the way you start to build your network. David Millay is the cover slide still up for the webinar?
It is.
Okay. CSU students, put yourselves on mute, but put your cameras on. We're going to give some folks a couple of minutes to log on because we're doing this through Sports Learning Online as opposed to our regular Zoom link. Gustavo, when we get to 10:20, just give me a head count and then we'll start, okay?
Sounds good.
In the meantime, Basil, do you want to tell Steve what your son was doing in and around the business of sports gambling and some of the work he was doing with DraftKings?
My son Alex is in San Diego, and he was handling the DraftKings account for their agency as they were rolling out to each individual state, as they became legal. So he's the last three and a half years doing that.
Which agency?
Veritone.
Okay, don't know.
I didn't know them either. It's a public company. It's odd that they're in San Diego with all the marketing people for DraftKings being in Boston, but I think it's just really a business deal. It's kind of my take on it, and agency business doesn't appear to be like it was a couple of generations ago. It's their AI ability, I guess, especially with the complex different messages, due to the both national, local, state regulations. It's really a kind of a mosaic that they need to put together, and I think that agency's expertise is just in that operational ability.
And Steve, we're not going to start till 10:20, but Steve, really quick, give Basil a little background on Blackhawk Network and your role in the group.
Well, I will say I looked it up. Very interesting. So don't think I don't know.
Yeah, Blackhawk is the largest distributor, one of the largest distributors in the world, and issuers of gift cards, the kind that you see in the grocery store. We have a massive, very important exclusive relationship with the Kroger companies and all of their store banners across the US. And I specifically work on sports betting and casino related content. So if you've picked up a DraftKings card or a FanDuel card, to gift it to somebody for Father's Day or to use it for your own purposes, if you're 21 or over in a legal jurisdiction, I was involved in putting that out in the grocery stores. We like to think it really helped normalize sports betting when we started putting these gift cards on the rack next to Starbucks and Apple and Netflix and all of our other partners.
That's so cool. I really wasn't aware of that before.
And for the Cleveland State students that are listening in, probably by first quarter, you could buy a sports gambling gift card for one of your friends at DraftKings and some of the big players in the business. So that's that's the business that Steve is now in.
Hopefully
Okay,
by next month.
All right, Gustavo, I got 32 in the room, so I'm gonna go ahead.
32.
Yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and start the webinar. So if you want to start recording, you can. All right, welcome folks to a kind of a dual webinar today with Sports Learning Online and a lot of my students from Cleveland State, where we're going to be talking about the impact of legalized sports betting. With me today is Steve Pastorino, who's the Director of Business Development at Black Hawk Network. Steve, welcome to the webinar.
Good morning and greetings from Bellingham, Washington.
Steve, we're getting a little bit of reverb on your audio.
It was Lexi.
Okay, all right.
We're good now? Okay. Anyways, good morning from Bellingham, Washington, just a few miles from the Canadian border and the campus of Western Washington University. Good to see everybody.
All right, and then I want to welcome a dear friend in Basil DeVito, who was the president of XFL1, a consultant on XFL2, my mentor in grad school, and also a member of the advisory board for our sport management program at Cleveland State. Basil, welcome to the webinar.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
All right, guys, let's go ahead and get started. Steve, the first question is going to come your way. Basil, you can jump in on it, but Steve, we've seen a lot of activity recently with Penn Gaming spending a lot of money to be associated with ESPN, and before that, Fanatics buying PointsBet. As you look at the competitive landscape of sports books, what are the implications and what are going on? Because we know that DraftKings and FanDuel are the big dogs. So from where you sit, give us your thoughts on consolidation and competition.
Sure. Thanks for having me. And I think important for starters to say that I live in Las Vegas, Nevada, and I have been involved in the sports betting industry since the repeal of PASPA, which gave states the right to legalize sports betting a little over 5 years ago. And I've been in a couple different roles. First and foremost, I worked for a company called US Integrity that helped create the sports gambling education platform in association with another school in Ohio. And the US Integrity was involved in monitoring and investigating and preventing potential allegations of fraud, violation of integrity, cheating, et cetera, in the sports betting space. So I've seen where states like Colorado have legalized sports betting, offered 30 plus sports betting licenses to different companies. And we've sort of let the market play out over the first 5 years, the survival of the fittest. We've already seen a surge in consolidations, as Jim referenced, in the last year. And basically, I'd say the landscape looks like this. DraftKings and FanDuel are number one and number two, or number two and number one in every jurisdiction in the US, with the exception of Nevada, which is an interesting case, and we can talk about that more later, but neither one is licensed in Nevada right now, so we don't have those in my current home state. And then BetMGM is a solid number three in the marketplace. Penn Gaming, which runs a series of brick and mortar casinos around the country, and Caesar's Palace, which also owns properties in a dozen states around the country, are traditional casino companies that are battling for market share in this online sports betting space. And so you could say that there's sort of 4 and 5 in the market. One more that I put in that category, Bet Rivers, the Rush Street Interactive Group. They also operate brick and mortar casinos and are trying to translate that business into online sports betting and then we'll call it a seventh player that's trying to make some noise is Fanatics, who we all know is a apparel company and a collectibles company and now a ticketing company. They purchased a sports betting operation called PointsBet, and so they all of a sudden will have licenses in more than 15 states beginning this fall. And so we've gone from, in a place like Colorado, 30 different license holders where you as a consumer can pick who you want to bet with and take advantage of multitudes of offers to try and grab your business and pull you into the ecosystem, to a rash of consolidations already. And even in states with multiple licensees, Ohio is another good example where I think there's at least a dozen licensees. It's really already shaking down into generally 3 or 4 top players in every state, and everyone else is fighting for slivers of market share. The majority of sportsbook operators are generating less than 1% of the betting handle in any given jurisdiction, where just FanDuel is at about 40% of the national market share. DraftKings is 35% of the national market share, and BetMGM is probably 15% of the market share. Right there, that's 90% of the market share is with 3 companies, and everyone else is fighting for the leftovers.
Steve, I'm going to jump in just to kind of speed up where I want to take this, but Penn makes a massive investment with ESPN, and you still have some big states like California that haven't legalized yet. So will they just go crazy on the new states to get their market share that way? Or do you think the partnership with ESPN can really put a dent in the big 3 and the market share they have there?
Well, there's nothing that Penn and ESPN can do to speed up the legalization of California or the introduction of regulations that would be favorable to them somehow. FanDuel and DraftKings already operate as daily fantasy companies in California, Texas, and Florida, which are the next 3 big states. And so they already have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of customers in their ecosystem in that state. The big challenge is whether ESPN brand name can help a company like Penn, which has no brick and mortar casino presence in California, acquire companies. And we've already seen a major media company in Fox Bet spend hundreds of millions of dollars, the Fox networks, to build a sports book called Fox Bet, which they just shut down 2 months ago for lack of market share. So I'm actually more bullish on the fact that Fanatics can acquire sports betting customers because they have 100 million sports apparel customers in their database than I am bullish on Penn with the ability, even with ESPN's marketing might, to acquire customers.
Okay. Basil, I'm going to pull you in real quick. Quick introduction on your background and how you got involved with sports gambling.
Well, I'm a graduate of the Ohio University master's program, and I had a stint in the NBA at the Indiana Pacers initially, and then I made a career move into television and spent 5 years at the local television level producing the Bob Knight Show, which always brings some interest. And then in 1985, I had the fortunate circumstance to go to work for Vince McMahon at the WWE. And basically, I was with the WWE from 1985 to after 2020. But along the way, my personal interest in thoroughbred horse racing led me to a position with the Breeders' Cup World Championships, which I still handle their television today. And in what we're the filter by which I look at everything Steve was just talking about is really from the rights holder side and the television side. And just an aspect of that is now we talk about ESPN's relationship that they've just developed. And I go back to where I was with the XFL, which we may talk about later. But when in XFL 20, we had two partners, Fox and ESPN, and they each had half of the games. And in trying to normalize and integrate wagering companies, well, they each had their own relationships with wagering companies, which doesn't make it easy. So that is an area of ground that I've been struggling with and still work with today with the Breeders' Cup World Championships as we look at the different platforms, and especially as FanDuel has rebranded FanDuel Television. So you have national exposure of betting platforms and brands, yet the execution is in many fewer states. So it's an interesting quandary as it works with that. So that's my focus with this.
All right. So one of the reasons I wanted you on the show today is you were the president of XFL1 and a senior advisor on XFL2, but the XFL a little more progressive than the other sports leagues. So could you just talk to us a little bit about the in-game integrations and, while maintaining the integrity of the sport, but you guys were out front in the way you were promoting sports gambling.
The XFL 01 and XFL in 2020 is a perfect example of how things have moved forward, changed, and grown. 2000 was the Stone Ages. 100%, it wasn't even anything like we have today. And actually, in 2000, if you think about it, owned by the WWE and NBC. So we have a network owning a league back then. We had the WWE, which is an entertainment company owning a league. And there was great confusion. There were articles being written, are the linebackers going to use chairs, to get the players on the sideline? So we had a real problem. And we had a franchise in Las Vegas. And back then in 2000, 2001, the only place you could legally bet was in Nevada. So with that being the case, we had a very rifle shot, and our goal was to have wagering on the first XFL game to, frankly, give us legitimacy as a authentic sports league that you could bet on. And the way we actually did it, and I really think this was the Stone Ages, and Steve will absolutely say that, we held a game for only the race and sportsbook managers in Vegas. A couple of dozen people at Sam Boyd Stadium, nobody else in the stadium. We gave them our pitch, we gave them our rules, we told them who the players were, and we played a game, but that was just for them. And they walked out that day and said, you'll have betting on the first game. And that is so elementary compared to today. And then you flash forward to 2020. And when we were introducing the XFL, we wanted to jump right in the middle of it. It was still, even in 2020, was still at the beginning of what we're seeing now explode. And the idea was pretty straightforward. With only 8 teams and a 10-game season, the likelihood of a tie in the standings was very strong. And we suggested that the first tiebreaker to get into the playoffs after win-loss record would be record versus the spread. And we thought that would be a tremendous thing. And what does that mean? It means you have to have an official spread. You have to have it before the game starts, and you have to be able to tell everybody what it is, including the coaches, etc. Well, what happens? We're on ESPN and we're on Fox. And it just wasn't, they each had their own sports wagering platforms, and we just could never make the connectivity to have one partner. And And so it was a great idea. We wanted to lean into it, but especially for the rights holders nowadays, you now have to integrate not only what your own rights are, where it's legal, where it isn't legal, and who your distribution partners are. So it has made it a difficult Rubik's cube to create.
Right. But when you and I were on the phone and we were talking about the relaunch of XFL2, you said, Jim, there's a new revenue stream here that wasn't there with XFL1, and that revenue stream was sports gambling. So now all of a sudden we're talking sponsorships and other opportunities, right?
Yeah, and the biggest hurdle and roadblock, frankly, was our distribution partners. We had the ability to sell a 2x2 sticker on the helmets to monkey knife fights. I had never even heard of them. And when the sales guys brought it in, I said, oh, come on, we were trying to elevate in 2001, we marketed awesome a restaurant with bad food. We did everything right except the football. So in 2020, it was Vince's real strong point that we've got to have this right. We've got to play football, and we've got to be, really professional. Monkey knife fights, this doesn't fit. So when I find out it's only going to be a 2x2 on the back of a helmet, and the amount of money they were willing to pay, especially for our LA franchise, but what's the problem? I had two broadcast partners that I couldn't get it approved by.
If you, real quick, and we're gonna move on to college athletes, but if you could have gotten them to buy in, how much money would Monkey Knife Fight put for a little 2x2 sticker on the helmet?
We were talking 20,000 per team per week. So that was 160 as about $2 million deal. And we hadn't played a game yet.
We're covering.
And I think Monkey Knife Fight later sold its interest for $90 million, so it would have been a pretty decent investment on our part.
All right. I got to keep this thing moving. So we're shifting gears. The risk to college athletes. I was down in Athens, Ohio last Saturday to watch the Bobcats beat Iowa State. Iowa State was missing some players because they got tied up in sports gambling. So, Steve, I want you to take the lead on this question. Just, what are we going to do? That's just the start of it. We're going to see more of this, right?
Yes. So there is a ton of education that needs to take place amongst, I guess, all potential sports bettors, but particularly young people and young people who are playing athletics at an intercollegiate level. There is betting on some platform in the world on virtually every NCAA sport. So while we have a great example to talk about in NCAA football, Division I, Power 5 football, and this one, which we'll talk about, there's also been a major issue with betting on college baseball involving Alabama that we'll talk about in a second. And there is betting on women's volleyball, and there is betting on men's and women's soccer, and there is betting on all these other sports. And I have a feeling that when a volleyball player who spent her entire career learning how to set or learning how to spike, not too many people have been talking to her along the way, or him, about the perils of this newly legalized sports betting world. And in the case of Iowa State, the laws are very clear. If you're a scholarship athlete at Iowa State and you're a football player, you are prohibited from betting on football. You're certainly prohibited from betting on your own games, et cetera. And a couple of football players thought they were being enterprising in that one of them basically set up the account in his mom's name and then was placing the bets. But this is the 21st century. Our phones, which are basically our lives, have what's called geo-tracking devices. It's required from a sports betting perspective so that the sports books know that you're legally residing in the state of Iowa when you're betting under Iowa state sports betting regulations. And in this case, it tracks it directly to the location of the bets. And when 600 bets end up showing up out of an account that basically trace back to the locker room of the football program at Iowa State, the investigators know that they have a problem on their hands. Somebody inside the locker room is betting on football. And why is a, I don't know, 50-year-old mom from Iowa in the locker room so much? They quickly realized that it was what's called a ghost account. Just like using a fake ID to buy alcohol when you're not 21 in the States, they'd used a fake profile to place the bets. And this is one of the most clear-cut examples of young people who just didn't realize that their quote-unquote anonymity, particularly in a highly regulated sports betting world, really didn't exist. And so cut and dried, and from what I understand, dozens of athletes at Iowa and Iowa State are just tip of the iceberg in what's going to happen with issues with college student gambling.
All right, and real quick, you have some insights for us on Basil was a college baseball player at Ohio University, but the baseball coach at Alabama lost his job. So, and the bet on that was tracked back to the great state of Ohio, right?
Yes, from what I've read, a high school college baseball scout, buddy of the baseball coach, walked into the BetMGM physical sports book at Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati with essentially a duffel bag full of cash, and said, walked up to the counter and said, "I'd like to bet $250,000 on the University of Alabama baseball team to lose this afternoon." And if you can imagine the poor college kid who's working the counter said, "Just a moment, let me get my manager." Walks back, grabs the manager. "How can we help you?" "I'd like to place a $250,000 bet on today's baseball game." Manager says, those games have a limit of, I think, $10,000. We'll allow you to put that down, but we need a lot of information about you. Once you exceed certain thresholds, and $10,000 is a really key threshold in the financial regulation world, then we need your name and address, etc. Guy got a little bit nervous, but he ended up placing a bet for $10,000. The sports book called my former employer, a company called U.S. Integrity, that investigates these things, said, "Hey, this is crazy. We haven't seen a single bet in the entire country on this game today, yet somebody just walked in looking to bet a ridiculous sum of money. Something's up here." And literally, the cameras in the sports book could see that the customer had the Alabama baseball coach on the phone while he's placing the bet, and they're texting back and forth, and the Alabama baseball coach is saying, "Hey, my ace, our best player, best pitcher, highly touted prospect, is not going to pitch today." And with this little nugget of inside information, his buddy decided, "I'm going to go make my money on this," because the sports books that set the odds and set the line, they don't know that Alabama's ace is out. I do. I'm going to win a bet. Anyways, again, really easy black and white case, easy for investigators to find the perpetrator, and it cost the Alabama coach his job as well as several others involved.
Right. All right. So I got to pull Basil in just for a second. Basil, could you imagine the inside information you could have been sending your friends back in New York when Ohio University was playing baseball? There were certain games you knew you were going to win for sure, and there were games where you probably knew not a chance.
Well, yes and no, though, because 50 years ago. So that gives you the idea. We just were not, you might have bet an NFL game, or you might have thought about college football. But back then, these other sports were not things that we thought about. I mean, some people might have, but it wasn't the awareness at the college level. In my recollection, we might be wondering about
All right.
the Brown game.
I beat that. And I just want to remind my students that there are casual gamblers and there are avid gamblers. And during COVID, there was nothing to gamble on. So people started gambling on Russian table tennis and the Korean baseball league. So, all right, Basil, I'm going to pull you in. TV ratings, big part of the XFL and the success and whatnot. But sports gambling's got a way of keeping you tuned in to the end of the game because of the line. So can you share with my students just some of the strategies that you employed early on and then later on to really promote the line of your games, which the NFL never would have done back in those days. And now they're starting to loosen up. So talk to us a little bit about the strategies that you did with the betting line and the broadcast.
Well, as I told you, we had hoped to really have an official betting partner, an official line, and really close the loop on that integration, right? By making it the next most important thing after wins. It was win against the spread, but we didn't get that done. However, because we'd done the due diligence in being able to execute against this, we ended up with Fox and ESPN, but we opened every game with the line and with the over/under for every game. And unfortunately, it was delivered by two different companies depending on where you were on television, which is kind of a clunky way to do it. But I do believe we were the first entity to put in professional football anyway, to put up the lines and the over/under and then update them at halftime. And we had done all the work. We had, we were working with coaches and players and done the foundational work. But again, it was, we were unable to make that final connectivity to do something more with it because we had multiple wagering partners and there were different lines on games. So that was the issue there.
Right. So just a question for you and Steve. If you're looking into your crystal balls, as sports gambling becomes bigger and bigger, what will the future look like with the integration on TV? I mean, in some cases, we'll have the broadcast, and other cases, we'll have the betcast. So where is it going, Basil? What do you think?
I wonder how much effect. I don't think this was the reason or anything, but I find it interesting that the NFL, when they're going to do double headers on Monday night, that they're simultaneous to a degree and only staggered by an hour. So if you have a double header, and okay, you can bet this game and you can bet this game. Now I wonder, during the overlap of the at least half to three quarters of those games overlap, I wonder how the opportunity for in-game wagering with two NFL simultaneous games going on with nothing else going on Monday night. I wonder how much that takes.
Well, Steve, I mean, there's data out there through different technologies to see how much money is being bet on each NFL game through, I'm trying to think of the company that does the geolocations, and the data is out there on how much money is really going down, right?
Yeah, there's a company called GeoComply that is that company that tracks the phone to make sure that where the bet is being placed, and they are tracking every app download and every attempt to place a bet or redeem a bet that is taking place. Millions of transactions during a typical NFL game right now. But where we're going is in Europe, many avid bettors are actually watching the sporting event through their betting app. So you're inside the app, you're watching the game, and literally you're just clicking on a sidebar to place your bets while the game is going. I firmly believe that, I don't know, 90% of America is betting a cheeseburger on Ohio State versus Notre Dame this weekend. And some of these technologies and some of this in-game betting and some of these really sophisticated betting is really only aimed at really hardcore bettors. So I don't know how important all these levels of sophisticated betting are when I might want to bet on my alma mater, except for when they're playing Ohio State. I went to Northwestern and you can give me 48 points and it's probably not enough to make me bet on my Wildcats. We shall see, but certainly in this age of technology, in this age of instantaneous statistics, with an ability to almost bet on every pitch in a baseball game. The next pitch is going to be a ball, or the next pitch is going to be a strike. There's the biggest menu of all time out there for potential bettors. I think time will tell what people really want to bet on, which I think it originates with, I went to one school, you went to one school, let's make a friendly bet over this game. Let's not, get wrapped up in, too much money, too much risk, or too sophisticated a bet, but time will tell.
Okay, hey, students, it's now that time. We got about 10 minutes left, so I'm gonna let you, the students, throw any question you want out there in the chat box. So just feel free to type it in there. Steve, while they're doing that, I did have one question I wanted to run by you, because we were talking about it the other day, but really, and some of our students will go into this, cybersecurity. I mean, if people can hack into power plants and hospitals and everything else, they can also hack into MGM and Caesars and DraftKings, right? So what are you hearing? What are you seeing about cybersecurity in sports gambling?
It's paramount, and I live in Las Vegas. Close to a dozen hotels on the strip that belong to MGM were essentially tripled over the last 10 days by a massive cyber hack. It has turned out that Caesar's Palace was attacked by the same group a week or two prior to that. They managed to shut down slot machines, like tens of thousands of slot machines at MGM properties, unless a ransom was paid. So in the same way that I talked about, the telephone really has a window into our lives, and don't, do what you think are private activities on your telephone because somebody is tracking that business. The scale at which sports books are exposed potentially to cybersecurity violations is incredibly massive. There's a huge enterprise being placed towards how do you stay ahead of the bad guys. But I think that the MGM and Caesars hacks for the last couple of weeks are just, again, tip of the iceberg of when there's so much money involved. There are criminal elements, including organized crime, trying to figure out how to beat the system, break the system, steal from the system, or hold the system hostage. And I would say cybersecurity across all fields, not just sports betting and gaming, is a great direction to think about focusing on.
All right. First question's coming to us from Owen Lang. Is there a better way to prevent athletes from betting on their sports other than just telling them not to? Steve, you and I have had long discussions about sportsgamblingeducation.com and the need to do better training, but what are your thoughts on, what should we be doing with our student athletes today to better educate them?
Well, many of the sports betting scandals have really been about shaving a point or two in a basketball game as opposed to intentionally losing a basketball game, and that's really hard to do. And the point betting scandal at University of San Diego, which is one of the most recent ones in NCAA D1 basketball from about 10 to 15 years ago, was essentially where one player was compromised and said, win in a game that you're clear favorites and scheduled to win, but don't win by more than X number of points. And it was rather challenging to understand how this was happening, when it was happening. It ended up being multiple games, and this player was basically leveraged and then blackmailed by the bookies to continue participating in the scandal. I don't know. I don't know that all the AI in the world can stop a bad actor from reaching the athletic trainer, the physical therapist on the sports team, say, hey, is the running back going to play today? Is the star center on the basketball team 100% or not today? There's these nuggets of information that sometimes even unknowingly are influencing betting markets. So I don't know that we know the answer to that, Jim.
All right, and I love what my former classmate, who was the AD at UNLV, would do. He would bring former members of the mob in to meet with his students to really show them the dangers, and if somebody ever gets caught fixing a game, once the mob gets their claws into you, they got you, and there's no going back. But I'm with you, Steve. I think that, especially with NIL taking off the way it has now, what's to stop the car dealer that's giving the star quarterback a car to say, hey, are you good to go this Saturday, or is your knee acting up? So the students, remember, inside information is just as illegal in sports gambling as it is with the stock market, and it's not worth losing your scholarship over. Hey, Baze, next question I'm gonna throw to you, but it comes to us from Cammie. When will the XFL or any college say enough to gambling? Would it be better or worse? There's so much money in it that I don't see it going away, but what do you think the future is going to look like?
I think it's exactly the other way. I think it's going to become more and more integrated and more prevalent. What are there, 12, 15 legal states? I'm not sure where we are, but it's not going backwards. I don't see any individual entity being the standard bearer to say we're not going to participate in this.
Last year, when the state of Ohio legalized betting, in the very first month, there was $1 billion of bets placed in the state of Ohio. $1 billion with a B in 1 month in one state. New York has $1 billion in betting every single month. New Jersey the same, Nevada the same. The dollars are staggering, and I think one of the most important things is that this betting was taking place before the repeal of PASPA 5 years ago, but it was happening offshore in these questionable accounts with these funny URLs that were not .coms, they were .curacao or something like that, and it was highly unregulated. It was a terrible consumer experience, and like alcohol and like tobacco and like firearms, I think we're in a better place that this is a regulated industry, that this is an investigated industry, but everybody's got great questions. This is opening a Pandora's box where personal integrity, athlete integrity, organizational integrity is very much going to be tested in the years to come. I saw that in England, sports fans or soccer fans in the opening weekend of the English Premier League were subjected to 11,000 betting messages over the course of the day if they were just watching several soccer games. And we do have to think about that impact of that messaging in the same way that we thought about the impact of tobacco advertising in the 70s and 80s and the impacts of alcohol advertising today.
And Jim, what happens with when you see the field goal being kicked when the game is over? The appearance, the perception of impropriety might even be more detrimental than the actual, because you start wondering whether the coach has got one eye on the scoreboard with the line, and then that really hurts.
Yeah. So, hey, Basil, I want to throw this question. It's coming to us from Bailey, and you spent a good part of your career on TV and viewership and how you drive the ratings. But here's Bailey's questions. In the wake of new sports, how will your ability to place an easy bet on a new sport, advance the sport and viewership? I mean, are we going to see ratings in sports like tennis and golf go up because now people are betting on them?
Well, I will use thoroughbred horse racing as the example. The Breeders' Cup World Championship is on NBC. The biggest challenge is it happens against college football, wall to wall on half a dozen, cable and networks and everywhere. So the only the difference with thoroughbred racing is the actual odds and payoffs are determined by the bettors. It is the most interactive wagering opportunity there is, except there are, I believe, while it's on NBC Network, 12 or 14 different places to absorb that content. So I'm finding that while wagering and might broaden interest, it becomes diffused. It is not Monday Night Football of a generation ago where it was the get out game and everybody who bet Sunday was coming back to look at one game to bet Monday. Now you can, as Steve had said about in Europe, you can absorb the content and in dozens of ways. And so it
Wait,
shows.
I got to cut you off. You just gave me a great teaching moment. For the students, go back and study the history of Monday Night Football and how it became so big. It was as Basil just said, the get even game. So before sports gambling was legal, your day to settle up with your bookie was always Tuesday. So you had one more shot on Monday night to make one final bet because you were going to be settling up with your bookie on Tuesday. Hey, so, Cleveland State students, we're going to keep this going for another 10 minutes or so. So please stay tuned. If you got to get on to another class, you are free to go. But Jamari, don't leave because I want to get Steve to answer your question, which is a really good one. Do players know when they are being betted on? So Steve, think of the prop bets. Will the quarterback from Notre Dame throw for 200 yards against Ohio State? A lot of prop bets going down on something like that. How would the quarterback from Notre Dame know how much money's going down on a bet like that? What type of technology and intelligence is available on prop bets?
Well, for a decade before the repeal of PASPA, the fantasy companies, primarily FanDuel and DraftKings, had realized there was a different way to get people involved in sports, and that was betting on individual player performance instead of team performances. And it was kind of couched in build a fantasy team and get a number of points and win or don't win. And so that really set the market, set the stage for what we're seeing in the market today, where betting on player performance has become as popular as betting on team performance, which, to several points that are being made in the chat, really puts undue pressure on the individual player. My short answer is every player who steps on the field should know that they're being bet on. It's not a question of if, but how much. Certainly, position players that rack up stats, quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs on offense, etc. It's more high profile, but there are bets, based on how many minutes certain players may or may not get, or a soccer player, will a player on a team get a yellow card or not, where a player can take a yellow, help out a buddy, win a bet, and not have a huge detrimental effect on the game. So it really is Pandora's box. We've opened up all sorts of polemical issues in the way that the U.S. has legalized sports betting, and this emphasis on individual players that is not as prevalent in Europe and other betting markets. But I don't know how to say it otherwise.
Yeah, Steve, question that Luke Adams is throwing out at us goes back to the earlier one on cybersecurity, but he said, with AI, is there more bot accounts and bets that make it harder to track and identify? So how is U.S. integrity?
Well, I don't think so, because again, in the regulated U.S. market, GeoComply has to certify that your phone is where it is. It is really difficult to bet on a VPLN network. I think we don't have VPLN. I'm missing the word, but where you evade the network and make it look like your computer or phone is not on the network that you're in. It's really difficult in the regulated market to do that. and even offshore sports books, I think are pretty smart at that. But what does happen is that there are brilliant consortiums of data geniuses that are exploiting inefficiencies in the market. When there's 30 different sports books, you're going to find a better odds here and a worse odds there. And if you can figure out a point in the middle where you can increase your probability by 1 or 2% of winning that bet and simultaneously bet in different places, that's very, I won't say it's very healthy. It's somewhat commonplace by these professional rings of bettors. And as long as there's a lot of competition in the betting industry for multiple sports books, it's going to be easier to exploit it. That's one area where consolidation might really work in the sports book's favor, because otherwise it can be really difficult as a up and coming sports book to not get taken advantage of by one of these data driven rings of sports betting.
Okay, so I'm going to throw Mark's question out last, Mark Breeds, but great question. Why are some states hesitant to legalize sports gambling? When it's raised the state's revenue in every state it's been in, the tax revenues are substantial, but California, the voters of California just slammed it the last time it was on the ballot, and companies like DraftKings and FanDuel were hiring lobbyists and everything. So if they can ever get sports gambling going in California, that's a huge market. But what's been holding it back, Steve? You used to work with the Oakland A's in California, and you keep a close eye on that state. What are your thoughts there?
In California, Oklahoma, and Florida primarily, but also in several other states, including Minnesota, Native American tribes have exclusive compacts with the state to operate casino-style gaming in those states. The tribal lobby in California and the other states, for that matter, is extremely strong, and they basically don't want to share any more of the revenue from any form of gaming, betting, casino games, etc., than they already share with the states. And the states have found that maybe the tax rules on the tribes are not as beneficial in those three states to legalize sports betting. In all the other states that we're talking about, Ohio, New Jersey, New York, etc., the state government set the tax rate, and the sports books are more than happy to pay it in order to legalize. In those three states, the tax structure is already in place. It's actually not that beneficial for the state. Tribes keep the revenue, the overwhelming revenue from any type of casino gaming, and the state have to negotiate a new compact with the tribes that everybody can agree upon, or else the tribes don't have to allow sports betting in the state. So it's a billions and billions of dollar question in those states. You're seeing it play out in Florida, where the Seminole tribe is actually going to win essentially exclusive rights to operate sports betting in the state of Florida. And then they're going to sub-license that right to some of the big guys like FanDuel and DraftKings in order to bring them in and establish a competitive market. But the tribes have the power in California. They're extremely strong politically, and that's why more than 85% of California voters voted not to take the power away from the tribes, because they've had it for a couple of generations.
All right, we're going to wrap here in a minute, but before we do, we were introducing a lot of our students in the class are freshmen. We're getting them, ramped up to be on LinkedIn. But Steve, you were kind enough in the chat box that if anybody wants to connect with you on LinkedIn, you're happy to accept them. You're a good example. If you look at Steve's bio and LinkedIn, senior executive with the Oakland A's, senior executive with a couple of professional soccer teams. If I'm a freshman or a sophomore at Cleveland State, I'm going to reach out to you. So Steve, thanks for doing that. Basil, you're not as active on LinkedIn, but you are on our advisory board with the sport management program. So I think what we need to do is bring you in for a combo session on the history of the XFL and WWE and all that good stuff. And we'll probably do that with this class and the Sports Business Club. So we'll be getting you on campus before you know it.
Well, I'm right here in Akron, so I'll be happy to do it.
Yeah. So, and hey, students, that's it for today. I'm going to
Gotta
ask.
go, Jim.
Yep. Go ahead, Steve.
I gotta go. Thank you, pleasure, and I look forward to chatting with your students, you, Basil, Jim, Dave, etc., in the weeks to come.
All right. Thanks, Steve. Safe
Thank you.
travels.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Hey, Basil, before
Yes.
before we wrap, one question that didn't make the full session, but there's a couple students straggling around, so I might throw this one at you. And it really, like Mike Millay wanted to know if we're ever going to put the genie back in the bottle. I doubt it. But what role does the XFL, the NFL, Major League Baseball have with they better not kill the golden goose. So they're going to have to promote responsible gambling and help fight against gambling addiction. Your thoughts there when it comes to a civic role for a league when it comes to responsible gambling?
Well, I really don't know. Although what Steve explained to us that I'd never, about the Iowa State, right? So you think Iowa State is not center stage, right? And so those guys are there figuring, oh, we got this worked out and how it works. I guess it might be like the surgeon's warning on a pack of cigarettes, that I was unaware of what Steve told us about how precise the tracking is. So I wonder if, as I don't think it's just straight education.
No.
I think there also needs to be.
I'm going to bring one of my students into this discussion. Dylan, free up your microphone, if you will. But Dylan's a freshman on the golf team at Cleveland State University. So you've gone through a little bit of sports gambling awareness, education, training. Did you know before today how easy it is to track you making? And I don't think you have, but if you were to make a bet from your phone with an account that you might have opened with your older brother, did you realize how easy it is to track where that bet's being made from?
No, not at all. Obviously I've never been high school athlete, college athlete, been in sports betting, but not at all would I've realized how easy it would be just to track right back to me, like they did the Iowa State players and stuff.
Yeah, cool. Well, and that's why we started sports gambling education. That today's athletic directors have got to put more money in the budget to train student athletes about the dangers there, and it's not worth your scholarship, so don't do it. Mike Millay, do you want to add anything? Mike Millay is the founder of Sports Learning Online, ran Disney Sports, ESPN's Wide World of Sports students. He's a good guy to connect with on LinkedIn. But Mike, do you want to add anything before we wrap today?
No, I think Basil, good to see you, buddy.
Yeah.
It was just really interesting to listen to both Basil and Steve talk about it. I mean, it's so vast, so deep, and I think for the students out there, it's clearly coming. I wrote it. I wrote a question: does it go back into the bottle? I didn't really think that. My bigger concern is really just how do we really manage the integrity? We already have a slippery slope going on in our society with people, moral dilemmas, and I think this just challenges them even more.
Yeah. Crazy, huh? Cool. All right. Well, hey, students, you're free to go. SRO team, if you want to stay on for a minute, we can recap. Basil, we will see you soon.
All right. Well, great. And if they need to get a hold of me, they can get a hold of me through you guys.
That's right. We'll make it happen.
All right. Thank you.
Is David still online or did he have to go?